Welcome to our Wednesday gathering. My name is Lisa Zook, and I am the VP of Strategic Initiatives here at Chicago Theological Seminary, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our time of gathering today, which we will be featuring our very own Dr. Zachary Moon, talking about his newly released book, Goatwalking, a Quaker Pastoral Theology. He'll be in dialogue with our very own Leenah Safi, a Ph.D. student here at CTS. So it will be a wonderful time of conversation, and we will have time to engage with Dr. Moon and with Leenah. And because so many of you are on here and will be wanting to engage, we will extend our time today until 1:30 for those who can stay. So we'll go ahead and go through our normal routine, and between like 12:50 and 1 o'clock, we'll go ahead and do our CTS announcements. And then those of you who have to leave at 1, we understand lots of folks are on a lunch break, can leave, but for folks who want to stay for some time of bonus conversation with Dr. Moon, we'll keep the link open for another 30 minutes. So just a reminder that because there are so many of us on this call, please keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking so that we can hear one another speak. I encourage you, though, to open up your chat window and use chat to comment to the whole group, to ask a question, to give an individual hello to a friend that you might see on here. A great way to stay connected while we're doing that. Also a reminder that we record our weekly Wednesday gatherings. So this session is being recorded. And those are posted on the CTS website. So if you go to the front page of the CTS website and scroll down, there's a section called Wednesday Gatherings. It takes us a day or two to get these up after the fact. But if you want to share this with someone, or if you want to tune in for something that you may have missed in past weeks, those are there for all of you. This year, we've adopted 2 new practices as part of our Wednesday gatherings, and we'll be doing these most weeks. And one of those is that at the end, during our time of announcements, we are giving away a $10 Starbucks gift card to a random student who is selected each week, recognizing the importance of caffeine in successful theological education. So students, stay tuned, and maybe you will be a Starbucks winner. And the second thing that we're doing each week is that we're starting with some words of gathering to invite us all together into this space. And those will be led by people from our community and friends of our community who are speaking out of their own traditions and welcoming us into this space. And today I am pleased to welcome Andy Kirschner to give us our words of gathering. Andy is a longtime friend of CTS. So I'll turn it to Andy, and after his words of gathering, our interim dean, Rachel McFell, will introduce today's speaker. So again, welcome. Andy, to you.
Lisa, thank you. It's always great to be here with you. Kim, thank you for the invitation to speak. And thank you everyone for welcoming me here today. I work as the Director of Community Engagement at KAM Isaiah Israel, which is the oldest Jewish congregation in Chicago. And our building is situated right here in Hyde Park, so not far from where you all are. And in thinking about this reflection and thinking about gathering, I'm noting that depending on what stream of Judaism you follow, many Jews are celebrating the holiday of Simchat Torah today. Like other religions, Jews have issues around their calendar. So some people celebrated it 2 nights ago, but some are celebrating it today. But this holiday of Simchat Torah, which literally means joy of the Torah, is the holiday where Jews celebrate the end of the annual cycle of reading the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, right? The first 5 books of Moses are read on a cycle throughout the year in most synagogues throughout the world. And it's always the sort of the same cycle with the same division. And it wraps up on this holiday that comes at the end of a slew of holidays from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur to Sukkot, Shmini Atzer to Simchat Torah. And I think it's relevant to this conversation that you're engaging in today, because what a beautiful piece of that service is that at the moment that the Torah is finished at the service, that scroll is lifted and put aside, and a new scroll is typically brought out at Genesis, and that reading starts again. And it is an important symbol in Judaism that when we think about our cycle of reading Torah, when we think about our cycle of learning, it's continuous. Just as we are ending, we must immediately rush to begin again. Even though it's the exact same words we read last year and every year before for how many thousands of years, we need to keep reading. And because the rabbis that really formulated the Judaism that we know today knew that learning leads to action. And in fact, there are statements in our tradition that suggest that, if you were going to do one or the other, you should start with learning because learning could lead to action. And what I know about the ethos of CTS, having been around for a little while and been engaged with you for a little while, is that you're not just a seminary that's about learning and about scholarship, although that's really important here. You're learning about preparing leaders that will take action and lead their communities to do great things and bring us to a more just world. And I think that there's something in the message of Simchat Torah there that we must continue learning because we must continue acting as Jews. And as one of the great Mishnaic rabbis, Rabbi Tarfon, said, it is not our job to complete the work, but nor are we free to desist. And I think that is the notion that I'm left with today as I'm celebrating this holiday, is that yes, it's about learning and the joy of it, and it's also about the change that will come from what we learn. So thank you for welcoming me into the space. I wish you a wonderful gathering today.
Thank you so much, Andy, for lifting up the transformative possibilities of learning. I, along with you, is celebrating Simchat Torah 2 nights ago and yesterday, and we've now entered into regular time, but we can make even regular time very special by the ways we gather and learn and celebrate together. So I have the good fortune of introducing Reverend Dr. Zachary Moon. And the first thing to know about him is that he is a Master of Divinity alum of CTS. So after later earning his doctorate at Iliff School of Theology, he returned home, as he should, and now serves as Associate Professor of Theology and Psychology. Dr. Moon works tirelessly to improve the quality of our programs here. The most visible parts of his efforts are the outstanding courses he teaches on pastoral care and counseling, chaplaincy studies, trauma and theology, moral injury. He is also a sought-after teacher beyond the seminary in academic and professional settings, and he serves on the advisory committee of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, a really amazing group that is reshaping how we prepare chaplains for the world today. Dr. Moon himself served as a chaplain in multiple contexts, including the United States Navy Reserve and the Pathway Home, a residential treatment program for combat vets who were diagnosed with PTSD, and in the VA hospital system. The book we celebrate today, Goatwalking, a Quaker Pastoral Theology, is really the first of its kind. It's a compelling reimagining of pastoral theology, which was established in the model of mainline Protestantism. But this book speaks authentically from and to Quaker experience. He was raised in the Religious Society of Friends, in the Quakers. He's ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. You can ask him to explain all that. But Dr. Moon has published widely beyond this book. 2 previous books include Coming Home, Ministry That Matters with Veterans and Military Families, and Warriors Between Worlds, where he explored moral injury and identities in crisis. Dr. Moon lives not too far from CTS, on the south side of Chicago with his family, which includes his partner, Joy, a licensed social worker and therapist, and 2 children, Gabriel, who Zachary describes as a scholar athlete, and Ruby, who is the most precocious young lady I've ever met, who is a creative engineer and ballet dancer. And they also live with Dr. Moon's father, Eric. We are very fortunate that his family shares his time and his gifts with us. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Moon and to Leenah Safi.
Thank you, Dr. Mikva, for that really very wonderful introduction. I think as a point of privilege, I'll just make a few opening comments, talking a little bit about why I came to write this particular book. And then we'll kind of open it up to a time where Leenah and I will be in conversation, and then ultimately that will open up broader still to invite your questions and comments. Although if there are particular things that you want to ask, feel free to use the chat box as a way to do that. I just want to begin with a word of deep appreciation for this community and for the community who's gathered here today. Members of my family and friends for many years who I know to be family, and students and folks who I have had an opportunity to work alongside, who those of you who are here know my heart, know that the reason I do the work that I do is because it affords opportunities to be in relationship with all of you and this learning community. So from that place of gratitude, offer a few words about this book. And I wrote some notes down so I wouldn't talk in circles for too terribly long. As Dr. Mikva just mentioned, I was born and raised in the Religious Society of Friends, commonly called Quakers. And this community was where I experienced my deepest belonging as a person of faith. In my early 20s, things were opening up in big ways in my faith life. And part of those openings was encountering Jim Corbett's writing. For the first time, really meeting a Quaker theologian who was unapologetically claiming an inescapable connection between faith and tradition and justice-seeking activism. At the center of his life is the practice of goat walking, which embodies his meaningful relationships to Quakerism, sacred texts, alignment within creation, and active resistance to American imperialism in all its forms. He wasn't advocating for isolationism, but rather countering the influence of empire on our ways of living and thinking and feeling by unplugging and literally wandering away from so-called civilization periodically as a practice. It is a faithful witness to the persistent demand of exodus from empire. And on these occasions, with 2 milk-producing goats as his companions, he could remain and sustain in the harshest wilderness. Goat walking for him was contemplative practice as justice liturgy. He did not wander aimlessly. He learned and charted the best pathways through the deserts of the borderlands so that asylum seekers and other refugees could make their way towards safety. Without goat walking, there is no sanctuary movement as we have come to know it over these decades. Corbett's trails are still today used by refugees and those who aid them in the borderlands. All of this inscribed my faith in a deep way. Not that I could really seek or even aspire to imitate Corbett's life, but rather to take seriously that faith, blessed with curiosity, and blessed with a commitment to one's context, could bear beautiful harvest. Flash forward a decade, and I'm sitting in my first class of a PhD program in theology and psychology, studying with an influential pastoral theologian whose writing had inspired and challenged me. I am totally doing my nerd happy dance on the inside, being surrounded by brilliant peers, learning from such a wonderful scholar and teacher. A few weeks in, I'm struggling, peeling back layers to better understand what pastoral theology is all about. It's clear to me at this point that pastoral theology is embodied liberation theology. But what am I to make of this word pastoral? it seems important, since it's right there in the name of the scholarly discourse that I feel so connected to, so energized by. But in a discipline of theology that interrogates just about everything, from systems of power to my relationship with my mother, I don't see how a shepherd watching over his flock in a pristine pasture has very much, if anything, to do with my ministry experience of caring for those in crisis. I know I'm not trying to be anybody's shepherd, nor have I cared for any folks who seem much like sheep. And I can't think of a time when that care encounter took place with the provision of lush surroundings. And then Jim Corbett and those goats in the wildlands, they come flashing mischievously into my mind. Corbett was a pastoralist of a different sort. Could goat walking be a pastoralism that I could embrace? Well, my professor hated the paper that I wrote for that class, but this idea, it had itched, an itching deep in my soul. It had scratched that itch. This book has 3 very modest invitations. I would love to talk with others devoted to pastoral theology about the usefulness and influence of this concept of pastoral. Maybe it's time for some new language there. I'd love to talk with others about Jim Corbett, about his work and his life. And third, I would love to talk with Quakers and other faithful folks about care practices rooted in the Quaker tradition. And it's that third invitation, the one to Quakers, that I hold most tenderly. Quakers don't talk about pastoral theology and pastoral care. The materials I've cited in this book are drawn from 3.5 centuries of Quaker tradition, but finding language and ideas that relate directly to pastoral theology, that would be hard to come by. Instead, this is a messy, constructive theological work. In the book, I offer 4 tenets for a provisional Quaker-based pastoral theology. Those 4 tenets: attentiveness, adaptability, symbiotic relationship, and co-creativity. These are concepts that can be traced throughout Quaker traditions in different ways, and Jim Corbett's free-range pastoralism of goat walking embodies all 4. So with those words of introduction, I'll turn it over to Leenah to begin to carry us forward in a conversation.
Well, Dr. Moon, this book is the book that we've been waiting for in so many ways. It's delightful and challenging, and speaks many prophetic words that are reminiscent of my own faith tradition as a Muslim. And so that has been such a delightful experience, but it also agitates in many ways. And I think what you speak of, the deep resonance and the want to belong within community, and what that's like in doing pastoral care and attempting to care for folks and not necessarily finding the right language readily available can be very difficult and a very lonely path. So I'm struck with kind of beginning with the imagery and the title of the book, right? Goatwalking, a Quaker Pastoral Theology. For a lot of folks will feel perhaps like some foreign terms or just terms that we're not really sure about. And the book really, it talks about the images and kind of parses them out, but it wants to do more than just remain in the image. So where do you see the importance of imagery? How do you see that playing out in the work of pastoral care?
Yeah, thanks, Leenah. I start with metaphor and imagery in the book because of how evocative images and symbols, stories and narratives can be. And for many of our traditions in different ways, we can think of what some of those images, some of those stories, some of those narratives, they are deeply infleshed with meaning within our tradition, and yet they are also constantly being subjected to our own messy encountering with them, right? And for many of our traditions, that's embraced. Sometimes it's seen as agitation, right? Sometimes it's seen as mischievousness or heresy or other things, right? But there's always this, what is this relationship back and forth between these stories, between these images, and our own faithful encounters with them? To me, I want us to have a faithful encounter with the imagery of pastoral. Not that we will be convinced that pastoral metaphor is even entirely useful to us, but I think we are invited to at least encounter it, in as much as we are committed to continue to pursue a theological discourse that claims pastoral for its namesake in that kind of way. And perhaps we have a sincere conversation about that, and we decide we should come up with something entirely different. But one of the things that I really celebrate and want to really stand in awe of is the way in which both story and imagery have a way of resisting control. So a sacred text, right, in the hands of the powerful can be interpreted in a very specific kind of way, usually, right, to beget that power and that control continuing to get to be perpetuated and reperformed generation after generation. But that very text, that very story, that very image could also be of sustenance to the subaltern, to the marginalized, to the dehumanized, to the rejected and the exiled. How is that possible? How could it, in the hands of the powerful, mean one thing, and in the hands of the ones resisting, those base communities of resistance, be perhaps even more powerful for those communities? This to me is a source of nourishment and challenge, and as I say, awe and celebration, that when we invite ourselves to reflect on imagery, we are inviting ourselves to choose a kind of a freedom if we're willing to encounter those imageries and those traditions and those narratives on their own terms. If we're willing to come with open minds and open hearts to that encounter, we may find ourselves having learned something, right? Having changed in some way, and perhaps new meanings kind of coming to bear. So I think there's some work there for those of us who are particularly interested about pastoral theology to kind of bring or approach the pastoral imagery and the pastoral metaphor in a new way. I think for a Quaker community, or really for any community that maybe pastoral theology is not the sort of normalized starting place in the conversation, I think there's also a kind of nudging toward or a little tug that says, you know, what would we bring to these conversations? How would we encounter this? And again, I don't think we need to rely on, and I say this as a pastoral theologian, I don't think we need to rely on the pastoral theologians to tell us the best and final answer for what pastoral means or what pastoral theology means. The students who have taken my pastoral theology class have probably been much agitated by my unwillingness to tell them authoritatively, this is what pastoral theology is. Write it down, put it in your notebook, tattoo it, you know, on your heart, and that's all you need to know. Rather, inviting us as a learning community to have that kind of encounter, to bring ourselves to the images, to the resources, to the traditions, and in that encounter, see what meaningful emerges from that encounter. And ultimately, that's the framework with which I think the best sort of pastoral care is able to come to life, right? Not with a sense of, my certification, my authority as a chaplain, as a religious leader, as a pastoral care provider will dominate in this conversation, will fix in this person, in their situation, but rather from a sense of openness, there is an opportunity here for us to do some work as we companion each other, as I accompany this other person substantively, sincerely, openly, patiently, mercifully, that something will emerge from that encounter that wouldn't have been possible in any other way.
Dr. Moon, as someone who sat in your classes, I am remembering all of this, and I am remembering the want to be able to write down notes and definitions and best practices. And of course, there are best practices and there are ways to, help us think about our work. But it can be disorienting to sit in class and expect to hear the teacher teach you how to do this practice, and then kind of have the tables flipped over and said, you tell me, right? You tell me what's going on, what is helpful, what are the resources, how can we do this together? And I think I think Goatwalking gets at that kind of mutuality in a way that can be really both agitational and powerful, but coming from a community that doesn't, we're not big on images, right? So we're not drawing pictures usually, or if we are, they're, the faces are blotted out, or there's a real sensitivity about actual images. So there are a lot of metaphors. We get a lot of metaphors in the Quran and in Hadith and in tradition. And as you say, there is this question of who are we in the metaphor? And that can be kind of played in multiple ways. It's not so set in stone, that I'm the right person in this situation, and the other person, right? And so kind of fixating in this sort of dynamic, I think is a hard truth-telling sort of conversation. But similarly to you, when I think about the question of pastoral, it's easy to imagine a shepherd with sheep because that's an image that we've all seen. And I think that is drawing on this feeling of, well, our experience with pastoral care, our experience with chaplaincy, our experience with being cared for is what we draw on most immediately. And so I'm wondering how you kind of see that, maybe this was a loving experience, maybe that, it wasn't necessarily a negative experience, but I'm wondering how you see that kind of drawing on those immediate experiences and immediate images as perhaps impacting the ways in which we do care for one another.
Yeah, I think this is really important, Leenah. You're drawing together a number of really critical points. I think one thing that I would say in way of response is when we are in those care encounters with one another, the likelihood that the stuff that you would have prepared to do in that care encounter, the likelihood that that prepared stuff is going to be followed, right, to the letter of your script is probably really unlikely, right? And this is true in the classroom, and it's true in a care encounter as well, right? You're meeting someone maybe for the first time, maybe it's not for the first time, but what ends up coming to the surface in that conversation or in that encounter, more likely than not, will be unexpected. And so the question of where are we in this is a pretty haunting question, I think, particularly for students in theological education, right? We would like to feel as though we could really stand firm and know with all certainty that we're saying the right thing and we're doing the right thing and we're on the high ground and everything is going to be okay. And the thing that sets us up for failure when that becomes our goal is first and foremost that that's not a great expectation ever to have of yourself in any context or any situation. But also if what we're aspiring to is certainty, I think Corbett would step into that conversation very quickly and say, who is served by that certainty? Who is served by that script of this encounter taking place? And in that question, I think we begin to really kind of peel back some important layers, because I think for some of us, who is served is not really the care seeker in the care encounter. It would probably be me, the care provider, right? If I got to do the stuff that was familiar for me, it would be easier, right? It would be more comfortable. It would feel like it was in, that zone of familiarity, and I'd be breathing easy, right? Well, is that what we should be aspiring to? That our jobs are easier and smoother and more familiar, to our taste buds? Or is something else really being asked? And I think if we were talking about Corbett, because I imagine him to be a very, sort of not quitting on the conversation kind of person, I think Corbett would say, who besides you is being served by that agenda around certainty? And I think what I am hearing from Corbett is, wherever you can trace the desire for control, the desire for certain defined outcomes, you are going to find traces of all of the ways in which empire living has gotten insidious into our mentality, into our approach, into our way of being together. The control is about exerting certain kinds of power dynamics, and we should be suspicious about both our own desire to grasp that kind of certainty, that kind of control, and at the very least, from that suspicion, be good students of it. Because I think there are situations where we do need to grasp out at some of that power, but to do it in an unconsidered way, I think Corbett would be conscientious about that, to be able to say, slow down here, let's really think about what this is about. Corbett says this wonderful thing, and Leenah and I have marveled at this together in our conversations about this. Corbett talks of Goatwalking as be unprepared. Right? I mean, that seems to be completely counterintuitive to, right, everything that we would, right? We are together in our faith community. That's a kind of preparedness, right? We have a devotional life, a prayer life. This is preparation. We go to do our theological education. This feels like a kind of preparation. And here's Corbett standing at the threshold saying, oh, don't forget, friends, be unprepared. This is one of the points of agitation. I love that Leenah is using that word today in our conversation. That is one of those kind of jarring agitation kinds of experience for me, and maybe for you as well. What would it mean to be prepared and also to be unprepared in that space? How would that change my posture, my position, my openness in a care encounter, in a classroom? Again, I think a lot of this is also inclusive of thinking about how we do teaching and learning as well. But these are big questions, as Leenah, you're raising for us, about what am I supposed to be doing here anyway, right? Where am I in this? The one who is prepared, and yet also the one who is called to be unprepared in order to perhaps be of adequate, faithful service in this situation. It's a beautiful tension, I think, but an agitating one, a disturbing one, a discomforting one, to be sure.
Particularly for those of us who are used to thinking about our work and the way that we exist in this world as guidance, as wanting guidance, as needing guidance, as giving guidance. And so, this kind of notion of being unprepared might sound like I'm not relating to God properly. I don't really know what I'm doing. And I think that is a difficult, that's a difficult one.
Yeah.
I know that's a difficult one for my own community to think about it like that. And at the same time, I think it nudges some questions about what is our ability in that space, like who is Leenah in that space, and who am I purposefully nudging out when I'm attempting to control the space with something that I prepped before I got there. And I was that hospital chaplain that walked around with a notebook, and I'm embarrassed to say, because I think that might not be what I would do now. But there were plenty of patients who wanted me to read. They wanted me to read from the daily bread book, or they wanted me to read. So this was showing up in ways that I thought I was expected to show up. And at the same time, I wonder about how that kind of pre-calculation on both sides might be getting in the way of some powerful presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think those are questions to keep in mind and in heart and soul as we do this kind of work. And again, I think Corbett's invitation to unpreparedness is that beckoning, right? It is that invitation to say, again, be cognizant of your own expectations for yourself and your own sense of what you think you have prepared yourself to do. That may in fact be quite directive in what happens next. And you may in fact be forcing things that you don't even realize you're forcing. You might be enacting things in that space that you don't sort of think to yourself, oh, I'm doing this. That point of reflection, I think, can be a very generative one, and ultimately one that we don't come up with a sort of clear and final sense of resolve to, but rather one that we want to continue to kind of check in and hopefully have some good friends around us to say, hey, look over my shoulder into this situation. Tell me what you see here. Tell me if I'm really allowing myself to lay down some of those expectations and that preparedness in order to really be present with people. And I'll say, at least to make this connection within the Quaker community, one of the things that I really as I went looking for pastoral theology in the Quaker tradition, perhaps that's the clearest way to frame that. I began by thinking about the central importance of what in the Friends tradition we would call expectant, waiting worship. Now, from outsiders, they think of that as silence or quietness, right? Those Quakers are just sitting there in the room and they're not saying anything, right? So that's the sort of outside observation. But within the tradition, what is being practiced there is not sort of quietness for the sake of quietness or silence to beget more silence. It's about allowing ourselves to wait in expectancy of something that is already happening, is already breathing and living in our midst. This to me has been of such rich importance to my own understanding of doing pastoral care work, that if I were to approach someone at the bedside at the hospital, or a conversation with a Marine in the smoking pit, if I came with a sense of open, expectant waiting in that conversation, if I leaned that way into that encounter, how that would be significant in terms of what happened next. Again, not with a sense of I'm showing up here, I've got my script, I know what to do, I'm prepared, I went to CTS, I'm a graduate. There you can see over my shoulder, there's the piece of paper that says it, but rather with a sense of inviting myself to be more attentive to what God is already doing in the midst of us. This is very much about what this expectant waiting worship of the Friends tradition, the Quaker tradition, is really about. What if we brought that framework to pastoral care? What if that's what unpreparedness looked like? What if it looked like a sort of unprogramming, a kind of opening or laying down of some of the scripted stuff, so that in fact this living, breathing presence could have more space to grab our attention, to to be witnessed to ultimately in that space. And I'll say that that has been the best sense of ministry that I've had in doing chaplaincy work and other kind of pastoral care ministries, has been when I've had a moment that felt a little bit like that Quaker expectant waiting worship. And again, it had very little to do with me. It had very little to do with my preparedness, but it feels to me like have a sense of connection, at least with that part of what I had experienced first in the Quaker tradition.
So Dr. Moon, one thing that, Corbett also does in this, this goat walking, more than metaphor in his life, is kind of break some of the kind of boundaries, perhaps, of thinking about pastoral care as happening in particular places,
Yes.
and in prescribed ways. Yeah. And as you know, I absolutely love the four chaplains that you bring in the book, and their voices and what they're doing, and how delightful it was to read, the patient saying to the chaplain that they love them. And, it's like things that we've experienced on the job. And we're like, this is not supposed to be happening. This is, something has happened here. And now I'm kind of like, walking on eggshells. And so to read it in the book was just to affirm the beauty and the humanity, but also that real sense of mutuality, and really kind of just touching one another's hearts and journeying with one another in this way that can't be, defined in a manual. And so I wonder about this. I wonder about pastoral care outside of chaplaincy context, and maybe more in our community spaces. And we come into those spaces, with these skill sets and with these kind of frameworks. How are we perhaps relating differently in our congregational contexts with some of these things in mind?
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief in this response so that we have a little bit of time to start some of the Q&A response as well in this. And I hope you all feel invited to linger with us here for some bonus time from 1 to 1:30 Central Time as well. Leenah noted earlier that for some of us, that shepherding imagery is one that's not only familiar, but may in fact elicit feelings of comfort or safety, right? To be cared for by a mentor or a religious leader. That when we're in community together, we may be sort of oriented, right? I'm feeling a little sheepish today, right? Figuratively, literally. I'm looking for a shepherd, right? Who's going to be that protective presence, that nourishing presence, and sort of be on the lookout for that. It gets a little more dicey when we've had some experiences that make us feel perhaps suspicious of shepherds, okay? I'm feeling a little sheepish today, but I've learned that I need to be pretty fearful of shepherds, because sometimes those shepherds act in ways with the power and the authority given to them that is actually kind of violating of this trusting relationship, is not deserving or betraying of this trusting relationship. So I certainly don't want to assume that everybody feels those sort of comforting feelings about shepherd. But Leenah, what you're asking us, I think, to think about collectively is within the community space, how do we understand the care that we're able to provide for each other? And what I like about where I think Corbett's work could potentially kind of help us to adjust a bit is in saying, don't just be on the lookout for those sort of singular shepherds who are the ones who are authorized to have the best answers and have the best solutions, and we just need to sort of be sheepish and find our way to those shepherds. But rather saying, do we understand how differently aligned we would be within this community if we saw each other in thriving symbiotic relationships? How would they be more equitable? How would they be more mutually life-giving? How would they be more co-creative, right, and collaborative as such? I love the way in which those concepts, I think, really invite us to think differently within our communities about how we relate to each other. But we would have to see each other as though we really deeply belong to one another, right? That's what goat walking just immediately takes us to, is Jim Corbett is not making it in the wilderness without those goats. Okay. So this is not, sort of, I got really friendly with these goats, I was kind of done with people, these goats understood me better. And so I just went for a walk. This is an understanding that he himself is critically nourished through this relationship, that they are able to do something because they are together that they wouldn't be able to do apart from one another. And that the exact particularities of that have some consistency and some inconsistencies, right? In different times and spaces, the goat walker and the goats are doing something a little bit different, but they are relying on each other. They are belonging to one another in this little community, in a way in which the symbiotic is central. The sense of my survival and your survival are intricately linked to each other. If our communities of faith or otherwise really valued its members, its participants like that, I think some things might be quite different in terms of how we are. I think many of our traditions and communities have ways of valuing the shepherds, but what if we were actually to value something in a much more equitable and symbiotic way as we look to one another, and with a recognition of both the belonging and the need for mutual thriving in one another as such. And I think there's some good stuff from Corbett around that. So let me pause and see, and Lisa, maybe you can help us with this, either from pulling a question from the chat box, if you would like to do that, and offer that to us in the handful of minutes we have still in this time.
Yeah, there's been so much rich discussion in the chat box, people asking questions about, what does it mean to be prepared and unprepared simultaneously? And that sort of question has been rephrased several times in the chat. So I think I'll just pull that one out.
Dr. Moon, you say something in the book about, none of us are prepared for relationships, but we're prepared to be in relationship. And perhaps that could be a framework in which to understand this kind of difference, which is we don't know who, when we're knocking on that hospital room door, or when we're meeting a friend or a member of our congregation or whoever it is, we're not necessarily, we don't know what's going to be said. We don't know what the situation is at hand. So we can't be prepared in that way, but we can be prepared to show up and to be present and to listen and to help engage to the best of our ability.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I would maybe even hesitate to say we're prepared for relationship. I would say we are created for relationship, and that for a whole lot of experiences that we've had, that is a persistently messy kind of thing, right? I trust people I shouldn't trust. I'm suspicious of people, who I shouldn't be, right? I'm jarred by this. I'm curious about I mean, we it's always going to be a messy meeting, I think, with each other. And I think coming to a place where we are at ease with that messiness, with the incompleteness and the messiness of ourselves, which of course can actually be a great service to other people, right? Who are a little unraveled or unraveling, that we may be in encounter with. It feels important, as we kind of consider the preparedness, to at least acknowledge the difficulty that many of us have, for very different reasons, with our own sense of vulnerability. That part of why I want to be prepared is I don't want to be found unprepared, okay? I don't want to be found out to be the not good chaplain, or the not good teacher, or the not good partner, or the not good father, okay? I want everyone to just believe all the time that I've got it, I've got it going on, right? I'm all together. And there are so many messages, particularly within American culture, that really press down on the very natural vulnerabilities that we all have, right? Within American capitalism and consumerism, right? We are told if you get this product, right, it will cover up my blemishes, right? If I get a house like this or this car or this opportunity, I will attain a kind of a status. And I think so much of what is messaged there is about being able to shield off our needs for one another. Again, this is something that's actually sort of creating a barrier of sorts from that symbiotic relationship. To the degree that I'm out of touch with my own vulnerability and my own sense of being created to be in relationship with you, right? For all of the many reasons that might happen, right? It becomes harder and harder for me to really be present with you in that space. And so as hard as it is to find those gentle, easy places, those soft places to be attentive to one's own vulnerability. And here I'm preaching a sermon for me here. So if this doesn't speak to anybody else, but if the need to cultivate those soft places so that you can be soft, so that you can be vulnerable, and allow yourself to do the grief work and the tired work that you may be carrying around with you is so critically important in doing this. And I think unpreparedness might also be a sort of signal to that, right? It would to say, what is this preparation trying to hide from you? And is it your own creatureliness? Is it your own vulnerability? Is it your own need for others? And what a wonderful, powerful thing it would be to be in touch with those things in really, I think, pretty transformative kind of ways.
I'm being mindful of time. So what I'd like to do now is I'm just going to pause this conversation just briefly. We have a few community announcements. I know there are folks who will have to leave at 1 because they just have an hour to tune in, but we will stay on for another 30 minutes of bonus time for conversation with Dr. Moon and with Leenah. There are some amazing comments and questions already popping up in the chat. And Zachary, I just have to say that what we were just saying was taking me back to the conversation that we engaged with a couple of weeks ago with Professor Haldeman when he was talking about failure, right? And so it's just, so I'm just loving this. But I am going to switch gears momentarily. We do have a couple of announcements for the good of the community. Can I call first on Interim Dean Mikva, who has, I think, 2 things to share with us.
I want to celebrate with you the fact that Dr. Christoph Ringer was just named as the PRI Public Fellow. So PRI is the Public Religion Research Institute. This is a prestigious fellowship, and we're very excited that they've recognized his activity and his promise as a public theologian and scholar. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that Dr. Ringer and Dr. Lassiter are going to be teaching our anti-racism workshop, not this week, but the end of next week for our Living Into Our Commitments class. And we're very excited that there's a cohort of folks coming together at CTS, COVID safe, of course, but to do some transformative learning together, and that they will be guiding us.
Thank you, Rachel, and congratulations to Dr. Ringer. He has an announcement, so I get to say congratulations to you, Christoph, and turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Dr. Mikva, for that, and thank you for this wonderful session today. Just wanted to invite the community to attend our Rooks lecture on Thursday, October 14th. Our speaker will be Dr. Carrie Day from Princeton Theological Seminary. And she's doing some extraordinary work. She is mining the birth of her own Pentecostal tradition as a form of political consciousness and radical belonging that has much to teach us about the possibilities of democracy. And we also have a guest to be in conversation with her, the wonderful Bishop Yvette Flunder of City of Refuge Church. And so we're really looking forward to a wonderful time. Again, that's Thursday, October 14th. At 6 o'clock. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Christoph. Joey, I think you have an announcement also.
Yes, hi everybody. For those of you that haven't met me, my name is Joey Carrillo. I'm the Director of Annual Giving and Stewardship in the Office of Advancement here at CTS. And I just wanted to remind everybody that we have a fundraising campaign going on alongside Rooks, just raising money for our Center for the Study of Black Faith and Life. And all gifts over the next month are going to go to a crowdfunding campaign. I'm putting a link to the chat in the chat for that campaign. If you'd like to share the campaign with your followers, social media, we'd really appreciate just getting the word out about the campaign and the great work of the Center for the Study of Black Faith and Life, including the Rooks lecture that's happening on the 14th of October. We hope to see a lot of you there and hope that you will help us in getting the word out for our fundraising campaign and the great work of the students and professors that are teaching courses and doing important learning in that community. So thanks so much, everybody, and reach out if you have any questions. The link is in the chat.
Thanks, Joey. And then, as I mentioned at the outset, every week we are giving away a Starbucks gift card to one of our students to help with your caffeine this semester. And today's winning student is Melvin Jones. So congratulations, Melvin. Watch your email for some Starbucks. And the last thing I'd just like to say is that we invite you back to be with us again next week at 12 noon Central Time. We meet every week at the same link. So the link that got you here today will get you here every Wednesday. But next week, we are delighted. Our time will be led by CTS student, Liz Pence. Liz is part of our student group, the Trauma Informed Clergy student group. And so that group will be sponsoring next week's time of Wednesday gathering. The title of their gathering is The Stigmatic Bearing Trauma as the Body of Christ. So it'll be a wonderful follow-on, I think, to today's conversation. And I'm going to turn it back now to Dr. Moon and to Leenah. We recognize some of you need to leave, but for those of you who can stay, please continue to engage with us for the next 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And yeah, I appreciate that some of you will need to scoot off the call, and that's totally lovely. Again, my gratitude for your presence with us for this conversation. And I hope this will just be an opportunity to kind of continue the conversation. A number of folks have been have I think been interested in thinking in very practical ways about what does attentiveness to that openness or that unpreparedness look like. As I noted to you earlier, I don't think the encouragement here is for us all to rush out and find the nearest desert, and the nearest, four-legged friend that we can come up with, and just get out there, to do some primitive camping kind of experience. I think the challenge is more about how do we begin in our in our sense of ourselves and in our life of faith to inhabit our lives in a way that is attuned in those kinds of ways. So rather than thinking about it as something out there that has to be pursued and has to be sought after there, I think what the more profound challenge is perhaps how would I do this right here, right? How could I embrace the vulnerability of being unprepared right now, right? How would that open me up in some things? How would I be a different teacher if I was willing to not have everything charted out ahead of time? How would I be a different friend or a different partner or a different minister if I was thinking about the ways in which other people are I'm not just making space for them, but I am actually really truly making space for God to be doing the God stuff through them as well, right? That's a really different kind of expectation than having a sense of, well, I got the ordination papers, or I'm the one who on my name tag it says chaplain, therefore I've got to be, this, that, and the other thing. And I appreciate the way in which, even if we do that personal work, sometimes people will really invite us to be that person, right? Chaplain, I want you to have the answers to my issues, and there's a certain kind of appeal to that, right? We would like to be able to be good helpers, and if someone is asking for a fix-it, we'd like to be able to provide that fix-it. And yet, in that very moment, we are, I think, betraying some of the possibilities for something more co-creative and probably more substantive to really come to life there. One of the elements that's really found throughout Quaker tradition is a really fundamental idea that God could use any of us at any time in any place to do the necessary thing. And that what we should be expecting, again, is not that there are a few designated folks who will have that burden, but that in a way we all want to be open and supportive of each other, in that openness to be used through God's presence in that way. That's kind of a different way of being in community. What if we were to take that out into our other relationships, right? What